How many rests the group of characters has had in between battles is often the biggest determining factor on how hard any given battle is going to be. A lot of dungeon masters pay a lot of attention to this idea, and they highly consider how many rests the characters have had before they go into any given battle. Sometimes DMs will think about this as a matter of attrition, a matter of ensuring that characters don't go into any sort of big battle fully rested. The greatest killer to boss monsters in D&D are a group of characters who just had a long rest. For boss battles, that makes a lot of sense. You want to pay particular attention to how many rests the characters have had right before they're about to go into a big boss fight. And if they go into a boss fight fully rested, you want to be prepared for that. Instead of thinking about encounters and rests as a matter of the attrition of resources from the characters, I like to think about rests as they take place in the story. In my own games, I don't really think about when the characters are going to have a chance for a rest. If it makes sense for them to have a rest and they want to do so, they're able to do it. If they're doing overland travel and they get into a big fight, it would make sense that they'd be able to rest right after the fight, even though they're about to go into a new encounter right after that. If the characters are about to go into a dungeon and there aren't going to be a lot of opportunities for them to rest, warn them ahead of time. Let them know that they're not going to be able to get either short or long rests very easily. If they're not going to be able to get short rests in particular, you're going to want to let them know. This gives the players an opportunity to understand that they need to conserve their resources while they're going through a dungeon, and they're not going to burn all their spells in the first encounter. If they're in a dungeon and there aren't a lot of places to rest, we can keep some restful ideas in our back pocket when the character is involved in a situation where rests are going to be really hard to find. We can think of these like upward beats. If they've had a whole series of hard encounters or difficult traps that they've dealt with, they might discover something that helps them out. And these things that they discover might help them get a short rest. An example would be a secret room that they can hide in while the denizens of the monsters are unaware of their presence. Another one might be a holy fountain that gives them the equivalent of a short rest without having to spend any time at all. If we keep a few of these ideas in our back pocket, it means that when characters are going through a larger dungeon, they'll have some capability to get a rest, even if it would be significantly difficult to do so. On the other side, we don't want our characters to necessarily go in fully rested against a big, well-planned out boss fight and just nuke the boss right off the bat. In that case, there are a few tricks we can do to make sure that the characters aren't going after the boss completely fully rested. The one I like is waves of combatants. Before the characters are actually able to fight the boss at all, the boss sends in a few waves of minions. And these can be easier battles. These can be battles against a large number of significantly weaker foes, maybe a medium battle against a few big brutes, and then finally the boss comes out after the characters have gone through one or two waves already. And at that point, the characters are spread all over. Their tactics, they can't sit and plan their perfect tactics at this point. They have to take on the boss after they fought a whole bunch of waves of combatants. It's a good way to give your boss a little bit of an extra edge when they're fighting significantly powerful characters. Generally speaking, you don't have to do this at below level 5. From level 5 and above is when you really need to start thinking about how to protect your boss from getting nuked right away. Once the characters have hit like 10th and 11th level and above, then you really need to pull out the punches and throw big waves of lots of monsters at them to burn down some of the capabilities that they have and to spread them out so that they can't just perfectly plan how to assassinate the boss with hardly any effort at all. So what about spells like Leomund's Tiny Hut, a spell where you can summon a nearly invulnerable shell to protect you over the case of a long rest? How do you deal with that? The answer is that time keeps moving on. So that, sure, they can absolutely cast Leomund's Tiny Hut and they can absolutely get a full rest in there. That doesn't mean the rest of the world is waiting for them to have that rest. If they do it in the middle of the dungeon and their enemies are aware of the fact that they've done this, it's a perfect opportunity for the villains to set up ambushes or traps or otherwise prepare for the characters when they come right out. The other thing is that villainous plans don't wait for the characters. If you want to make sure that the characters aren't going to have an opportunity to drop a Leomund's Tiny Hut right before the door to the big boss's room, ensure that the boss has a plan that requires less time than the time it takes to rest in a Leomund's Tiny Hut. A villain's ticking clock is the best way to manage rests. You don't want to do this all the time, though. Most of the time, the character should have opportunities for rest whenever it makes sense for them to do so. And if they want to cast Leomund's Tiny Hut to take a rest, let them do so. You always have other resources at your disposal to ensure that the challenge and the pacing of the game continues to stay high. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. You can also subscribe to the Sly Flourish newsletter or help support me on Patreon by going to patreon.com/slyflourish. Or finally, you can pick up my book, Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master. All the links for this are in the notes below. Thank you very much.